This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is July 16th, 2020, and this is episode 198.
I'm Scott Delunderbaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, we have an extended interview with Kim Darwin, one of the other candidates for the leadership of the BC Green Party. Thank you to the 103 people who contribute to the podcast every month. Thanks to our newest patron, Gary, and to Robbie and Suck Dem Voice, which is what they put in their Patreon, for upping your pledges. I also want to shout out Hypnotic Flame, Liam, Tushar, Josh, and JP, who are all longtime patrons, the next round, I guess, who started supporting the show before December 2017. So that's awesome. Thanks for giving us so much money over the years.
Good, thank you.
Join them and others to help keep the show growing at patreon.com/politicos. And as a reminder, episode 200 is coming up. We'll be doing a live on Facebook, I guess. It's probably the easiest place to watch it, on July 30th at roughly 7 p.m., maybe 7:30. Exact details will be in the show notes. Sign up on Patreon. You'll get the link. All our people on our Slack already have it. It'll be fun. We'll have some guests. Send us ideas if there's anything you want us to do or not do. And if you want to join that patron Slack, it's open to all listeners for the duration of this crisis, which seems to be getting worse in some provinces and continues to spiral out of control south of the border. Go to legandbootmedia.ca to request an invite. And Politicos is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the BC legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicos enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to politicstoday.news/free-trial. Well, joining us now over the internet is Kim Darwin, who is running for leadership of the BC Green Party. Kim, welcome to Politicos.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
To begin, could you tell listeners a bit about who you are and what led you to get involved with the Greens?
Sure. Just before we start off, I did want to say that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Sechelt Nation. And what got me involved with the BC Green Party might be a little bit of a different avenue than most people travel. I met Andrew Weaver at a BC Chamber of Commerce breakfast event. That was in 2014, and it was really his pragmatic, evidence-based solutions to the issues that are facing British Columbia that really attracted me to the BC Green Party. I had been able to hear a lot of politicians speak through my involvement with the BC Chamber of Commerce, and I stayed after that event and asked him, how can I get more involved? And that was a period of time when they were opening up their provincial council elections. And he said, well, why don't you run for a position on provincial council? I did. And the membership elected me about a month and a half later as the secretary. That is a role that I continued until last year, where I was elected as vice chair.
So why do you want to be Andrew Weaver's successor as leader of the Green Party?
Well, I really do want to build on the growth that our party saw in the last 7 years, and what Andrew Weaver was able to achieve in a fashion that I think contributed to the growth that we saw was that he was able to articulate our green message in a fashion that could be heard, outside of our typical green silo. So I'm not sure if, your readers or your listeners don't know that I am a business person. I have my own mortgage consulting business. So with my professional background in business and finance, I really think that I can provide credibility to the BC Green Party as we're starting to talk about we need to make the business case for a transition to a just economic model. We've been making the environmental and social case very well for 37 years, but I don't believe that anybody has really been a leader in the party who's been able to make the business case. So I really want to link the fiscal responsible investment with climate action and socially responsible wraparound supports. and essentially set the yes to the no when we're talking about jobs and economy, and really shift the narratives when we're talking about jobs and economy to green jobs.
So why make the jump straight to running for leader rather than trying to get a seat or running in the next election first?
So I did run in the 2017 election in the Powell River Sunshine Coast riding, and my team and I doubled the vote count from the 2013 election. And I do plan to run again. But what I can do being an unelected leader essentially is build capacity. So we have two MLAs currently. They have they have quite a folder that they are several folders and files that they work on. So I can add capacity and help build the team of MLA candidates that we bring into the next election. What I've done is I've set my personal business aside so that I can spend the time growing and building the MLA candidates that we can take into the next election to add capacity as well.
What distinguishes you from the other candidates in the race?
Well, so far there's only two of us, but there are rumors of a third coming on fairly soon. So first of all, I'm not located in southern Vancouver Island. I am a hop, skip, and a jump from Vancouver, which is one of the largest city in BC, with Surrey on its heels. I have been actively involved as a leader in the BC Green Party on provincial council since 2014. I think that was right after Adam and just before Sonia joined. I also bring that legal and business approach to the party, and we can talk about how important that is if we start talking about the 4-day work week platform plank. I also, as I mentioned before, I set my business aside in order to spend the time attracting and supporting the MLA candidates that we bring into the next election. I won't have any legislative calendar restrictions to do that. I also have a bit of a different leadership style, not a top-down style. It's more about empowering our members and volunteers to bring their expertise to form the party's policies, and really to have well-rounded, well-researched policies by experts in their field. We have so many thought leaders in our party that utilizing their expertise to really frame our policies is really important to me.
Maybe build on that a little bit, because one of the things I saw on your website is that you're not running on a platform. You're basically running to give voice, I guess, to the policies that the members have already established. So how do you run a campaign without saying what you stand for, other than just, I stand for what you members have already decided?
Well, essentially, I bring my experience to promote the policies and platform that the BC Green Party members have already put forward, and that's the difference between our party and probably some of the other parties, is that grassroots approach. We have a policy committee. Any member can put forward policy. Of course, it has to be well researched and whatnot, and that's what our policy team ensures is happening. So again, we're a people powered party, not a top down one where the leader dictates what we're going to do. Naturally, though, as we saw with Andrew Weaver, he was a scientist. So that's where, we started on you heard the term probably after Andrew started with our party, the evidence-based decision makings. I'm a business person, so I'm going to bring them more the financial approach, the economic approach, the business case. But having platform planks is not something that I believe is in the interest of our members.
So politics is often something that can happen on quite a compressed time frame. Responses have to be done quickly. There's going to be media requests. If you're successful in your leadership bid, how do you see the desire to get feedback from the members interact with the need to often react quickly as leader to evolving political situations?
So the membership, we have our party offices in Victoria, and that's actually another thing that I'd actually like to move our party headquarters to the Lower Mainland. And the membership always has access to our party office. We have every year we have our AGM, although it's been a bit delayed this year, and that's where we vote on policies that the members have put forward throughout the year. So we're not going to be changing policies on the fly. We also have core principles that are something that guide all Green parties. So all of our policies are entrenched in the 6 core principles.
So you talked a little bit about prioritizing or emphasizing, I guess, the business side of the Green Party, whereas Andrew Weaver emphasized maybe the science side. On a day-to-day basis, I guess, like you'll have this policy book from the members that already exists. Maybe let's get into some of the specifics in there that you think
Sure.
represent or reflect that business focus, that pro-business focus. Before we ask the questions, we were interested in what are your top 2 or 3 kind of policies that you're looking at when you talk about a business-focused Green Party.
So actually, I'm going to be putting out an article here next week on some solutions as we come out of the COVID-19. As we rebuild back. One of the things that we were already starting into a recession, but with previous recessions, they've affected mostly male blue collar workers, but not this time. In fact, with the job losses, 60% of the job losses have been women, 29% youth, and a lot of lower income earners, the service industry and tourism reliant workers and businesses. So I believe that the recovery that we have should be helping the people that were disproportionately affected. So one of my top things that I think that we should be doing is investing into childcare and early childhood education. So for every dollar that is invested in childcare from the research that I've done and early childhood education, you get $6 of economic activity. I was looking at the Quebec model, and I'm not promoting that we have that particular model. I'll leave that up to the experts. But in 1996, Quebec is one of the only province that really has invested into childcare, which has allowed now about 70,000 women to enter into the workforce, and it has more than paid for the program. So one thing that I find quite interesting is when we talk about infrastructure projects like building bridges and roads, they're costed over a 50-year period. But when it comes to investing in social programs, we tend not to do that as much. One of the other things that I think I would love to focus on is investing in the circular economy, which the BC Emerging Economy Task Force report came out last month, and it even cited that is one of the greatest economic opportunities for BC, and it'll really help us meet our climate targets. And a circular economy, just to describe that to your listeners, is essentially, I'll give you an example. There's a company called Chop Value in Vancouver that discovered that 100,000 chopsticks get thrown out in Vancouver every single day. So they've started collecting them and making them into household items and furniture. And there are like thousands and thousands of circular economy solutions. So, and again, that they're sort of a triple bottom line approach. You can make money, you take climate action, and have jobs and housing affordability. So I've been in the housing market in one way or the other, first as a legal assistant for 16 years and then as a mortgage broker. So housing affordability is really near and dear to my heart. In fact, I co-founded an organization called the Workforce Affordable Housing Society, really based on the need that I believe it's about 50% of business owners in British Columbia cite that attracting and maintaining staff is one of the most difficult challenges that they face. So, and housing affordability, we know that there's a myriad of there's a whole scale, whether we're talking about emergency housing, affordable rentals, right through to affordable home ownership. So it's a massive topic that needs to be parsed out. And one of the biggest challenges is that the federal government has not invested in many, many years in the fashion that they should. And as a mortgage broker, I watched Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation increase their mortgage insurance fees three times in a 3-year period. And I would like to see those funds go directly into housing supports. So there's the top three. I've got more: food security, electrifying British Columbia as well, investing in mental health and addictions. So lots. There's so much to do, but there's just a gist for you.
Okay, I want to pause for a moment on the green economy and how that interacts with the recovery you're discussing, because you made an important point that a lot of the job losses being outside of the industries that typically get hit, or like the sectors such as construction. However, there's going to be a need to do a lot of infrastructure work in order to green the economy. How do you see those interacting in the recovery?
Oh, so that's actually, I missed that. That is another one that is on my list, is really training and releasing an army of renovators, essentially. And to start with housing for low income earners who are, living in probably the most leaking homes that are, leaking greenhouse gas emissions. They're also paying, higher hydro rates due to poor windows and, insulation. I see that as one of the triple wins. It tackles income inequality, it reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and it provides clean jobs. So that is just a win-win-win that I very much support.
You mentioned in there housing, and one of the things I know a lot of our listeners and listeners of the sister podcast, Can Be Reporter, really interested in is density and urbanism, and increasing density as an approach to fighting climate change. Is that a view you share? And if so, what would be your approach to dealing with cities that seem to want to avoid promoting density and instead seem to, I mean, people have been squabbling over every minor development in Vancouver for decades. How do you approach it differently?
You know what? Density is greener. It just is. If we can get people out of their cars and closer to their workplaces, it makes sense from an environmental perspective, an economic perspective. It is far cheaper to build density than it is to build, massive transit infrastructure. So how do we get people on board with that? Perhaps education. I think the Vancouver City Council, I believe they get it. So it would be a matter of education. Not only that, I think as the younger demographic starts to get into the housing market, they don't appear to need the single family dwellings. They don't have that same expectation. Now, that's not probably a choice that they could even think of having, but I think that's the realities of it. I think that we'll have a better opportunity to promote density as opposed to the urban sprawl.
So I'm happy to hear that. I'm not sure I share your quite as optimistic view of the what the city council currently thinks on that. But one thing that you'll often see with cities is that they can be pretty resistant to changes within their cities. North Vancouver's voted down some affordable housing projects. I know the province got into a scrap with, I think it was Maple Ridge, over temporary modular housing. And oftentimes, the needs of the broader community beyond just what's in with one municipality aren't necessarily being reflected within what's happening in that local municipality's politics. Do you see a role for the government at the provincial level to get more involved in those sorts of decisions? Because ultimately, the powers of the cities are delegated from the province.
I do. I mean, we know that the cities don't pay for these projects themselves. They do require provincial funds. So that is definitely an area where the province can play a role. It is sad that we do have an awful lot of NIMBYism. I'm here on the Sunshine Coast, and we have a few affordable housing projects that have finally got the go ahead, but we've had the same thing, the neighbors not wanting it in their backyard for the more affordable housing projects. I don't know how you shift everyone's view. It's obviously not possible, but I think that the housing first model, the stats are in that housing is a key determinant of health. And when you can kind of make the business case that if people are well housed, then we're not going to be having so many strains on our emergency responders, police, domestic violence goes down, all of those things. So it's not only making the social case for it, but the economic case is there. Whether that's going to help people understand how important it is. I do not have a magic wand, but I will certainly be promoting that type of housing.
I want to switch gears a little and talk a bit more about the future economy. One of the ideas that's come up in the Green Party leadership race, and it caused a little bit of a dust up between the other contenders, Sonia Furstenau and Andrew Weaver, was this idea of a 4-day work week, and it either being legislated or highly encouraged through a reduction in the standard work week. You put out a bit of a blog exploring it on your own terms. Where did you come down on the idea of a 4-day work week?
Well, a mandated 4-day work week across the board is neither practical nor possible, is what I would have to say. I would more promote a flexible work schedule. I am what I guess I would consider a business expert. I've attended Sauder School of Business, UBC Sauder School of Business. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a volunteer on 4 business support networks. And when you really look at the types of jobs in British Columbia, it's just not possible to mandate a 4-day work week. Think about the 74,000 people that work in the gig economy. Universities, I mean, how long is it going to take you to get your university education? And it's not that I'm against a 4-day work week, but having it mandated it's just not possible. Not only that, and there really wasn't any context to which 4-day work week model was being described. So if it's 4 10s, working longer hours, how's that going to work with daycare? Or if it's 4 days a week being paid the same amount as 5 days a week, well, those costs get borne by business owners, and not all business owners can do that. You'll probably get the gist from reading some of my stuff. I'm a real proponent of small businesses, and I'm going to describe what small businesses is just so you can get that context. Small businesses really are small business owners that have between 0 and 10 employees. So those people could not, in general, across the board, mandated, could not afford to pay people for a 4-day work week, based on paying for 5 days of working. I mean, I could actually probably go on and on. You probably saw that my blog on my website was rather lengthy. I think I made a very strong business case, and the timing, I was really disturbed by the timing of this conversation. It was during the pause in the leadership contest, of which what I did while we were paused, we were prohibited from campaigning during that pause. So I went back to working on my business support network. I am a member of Community Futures. I sit on the board of Community Futures. We were responsible for distribution of the rural relief funds for small business owners. So that was the interest-free $40,000 loan, and we worked with business owners that couldn't qualify through the bank. And I also sat in on BC Chamber of Commerce events and a number of Zoom meetings trying to support our struggling business owners. In fact, 74% of business owners in a survey didn't feel like they could restart or even make ends meet. And to compound something like this during that period of time, it was just really poor timing.
So the 4-day work week has been pitched in a couple of different ways. One of it's about quality of life, but another aspect of it is the argument goes that it increases productivity among the workforce. And I understand you have some reservations about that, but I think the bigger question of aggregate productivity in the economy is something worth thinking about. Canada generally has not performed particularly well in productivity growth when you look at the economic stats. Do you have thoughts on how that can be improved going forward?
Yeah, like I said, I'm not actually against a 4-day work week. I just don't believe it should be mandated across the board. So, for an example, there was a period of time in one of when I was an employee that working 5 days a week from 8:30 to 3 to accommodate my young children's school life. And make sure that I didn't have the additional burden of childcare. That that gave me quality of life. There was a time when I worked 4 days a week as well. Regular hours. I got paid for 4 days a week, so there was also a financial burden to that. Now, increasing productivity, where people can work 4 days a week, where it's practical for both the employer and the employee, all for it.
Well, let's pivot a little bit again. Other things that are coming up in the future economy, things that I hear BC Greens talk about a lot, are like responding to increasing automation, the possibility of a basic income. I assume you have some thoughts about those kind of topics as well.
Yeah, for sure. And that will probably lead into something that we would eventually get to, which is universal basic income. And that is something that the BC Green Party in 2017, we wanted to have two pilot projects, in communities that had relatively the same number, the same population. And specifically, I mean, artificial intelligence and automation is coming at a faster pace than I think most people really know. And if we don't prepare for how we're going to replace the incomes that are going to be lost as a result of AI and automation, we're going to be in a real pickle. I think we're going to what we're seeing with homelessness now will get far worse, and I think we need to flesh that out before we get to the point where it's too late. And a lot of people say, well, where's the money going to come from? And I know everybody hates the T word, but we have to tax automation in order to get the funds in order to put them into universal basic income. The other thing, actually, I was just on a call this afternoon. The other thing is when the money gets dished out, it doesn't go into this black void. People spend it. They spend it in our stores. They buy groceries. They feed their children. They pay for the roof over their head. So it still circulates within the economy. And strangely enough, with the CERB, we kind of got a taste of what a guaranteed basic income could be, and even the big banks like Scotiabank and some of the economists are finally going, "We get it. This is not a bad idea." So I think. COVID-19 laid bare so many things, and that there are some silver linings if we act appropriately, if we come out of this appropriately, and that's one of them, that now people are actually talking about it and having a better understanding of the benefits. I mean, it is one of the best opportunities to reduce poverty.
So, in the past, when there's been waves of mechanization, automation, it generally hasn't resulted in a huge amount of joblessness. People find other work, change sectors. I mean, one of the reasons we are, in fact, as wealthy and prosperous as we are today is that we're no longer having 85% of the population do farm work. It's now closer to 2%. So, do you see that this current wave of technology and change is going to be significantly different from past waves?
I think so. I mean, you even see it. I mean, just for an example, in the logging industry, if you think about how many jobs there used to be in the logging industry and how many have been lost due to automation now. And I think the jobs seem to be, I mean, aside from the knowledge economy, the jobs where people are actually physical laboring seem to be lower paying nowadays.
You mentioned automation pricing in there as a possibility, and you've spoken about that in the past as a way to fund basic income. But one of the big criticisms of this kind of approach or a robot tax type thing is that it might serve as a disincentive to innovation. We want companies to become innovative, to become more efficient. And sometimes that does mean replacing people with robots. And frankly, even from the people side, why would I want to do the job that a robot can do just as well or better? How do you reconcile that issue with supporting an automation price?
Well, there has to be a fine balance. Obviously, we have to encourage innovation, and otherwise, if it's priced too high, then only the larger, wealthier companies are going to be able to do it. So there does have to be a real fulsome discussion about what that looks like. I am not a tax expert, but I do believe that we need to have that fulsome discussion with experts, economists, accountants, business owners, and really figure out what that looks like. But in the absence of that, where else is the money going to come from? We know that money doesn't grow on trees, although it kind of appears as though money is kind of growing on trees at this moment.
But why not just tax the profits of the corporations at a higher rate, or put a wealth tax and tax the successful corporations rather than the ones that are trying to innovate?
Certainly, that is all part of having fair taxation practices. Is definitely a key to ensuring that we have the tax base to put into that.
So I want to shift to a slightly different topic of technology, and that is energy technologies. In the
Mhm.
past, the Green Party's had some opposition to some low carbon technologies such as hydropower and nuclear. What do you see the role of the host of possible technologies such as wind, geothermal, nuclear, hydro in BC's energy future?
I am a member of the BC Sustainable Energy Association, and I'm a huge proponent of clean technology and renewable energy. In fact, in 2016, I think it was, maybe 15, I actually wrote the policy for both the BC Chamber of Commerce and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, calling on the governments to invest in clean technology and renewable energy. With the price of solar and wind and geothermal all going down significantly, it just makes sense. And I think I can't remember if it's 12 or 14 dams that we have already existing in British Columbia. So some of the opponents say, oh, well, when the wind doesn't blow and when the sun doesn't shine, what do we do? Well, we use our dams essentially as batteries. And one of the things that it just blows my mind, for anybody that's done any traveling throughout the world, you see offshore wind everywhere, but not in British Columbia. And offshore wind is one of the cheapest forms of energy to build. The infrastructure is cheap. Plus, it can be built closer to, the transmission lines can be shorter to where you need the energy. So I'm an incredibly big proponent of that. The other thing, what we're seeing right now, and I have mixed feelings about this, but in the north, with the abandoned wells that are now being taken care of by the taxpayer's dollar. When it comes to geothermal, where appropriate, and I know geothermal, we can't do it everywhere, but where appropriate, to convert those wells into geothermal centers, and especially in some of the Indigenous communities up north where they're still relying on, diesel-powered generators for their electricity. So I see that again as a real win-win.
Before we switch and close on some real politic type questions, I'm curious on one more policy question. Scott can jump in after if he has others. What is your view around how BC needs to move forward with reconciliation with Indigenous peoples?
Well, that's actually something that on the call that I was having this afternoon is we know that we have adopted UNDRIP here in British Columbia, but at the very first opportunity for us to show that we are going to do things differently, have a different relationship, have more respectful dialogue with the Wet'suwet'en issue, that was an abject failure. I think the only MLA that went up and had that respectful dialogue was Adam Olsen from the BC Green Party. So I see that is something that we fundamentally have to do in British Columbia. And well, it's terribly unfortunate that we were not taught the true history of the Indigenous people and what happened when settlers arrived in Canada. And because we weren't taught, there is just so much misinformation. And I know the children are being taught in school now, but we can't wait until the children get old enough to take authentic action. I don't know how we get that education piece to the adults that need it in order to have that fulsome discussion and respectful dialogue and to move forward, but it has to happen, and the BC Green Party is willing to make that happen.
Well, let's move into those political questions that Ian just hinted at. So, right now, the BC Green Party is very focused around southern Vancouver Island. The three seats that it won last election were all in a pretty small radius around the capital there. How do you see the BC Green Party growing beyond that narrow geographic area and diversifying to win seats across the province?
Let me be cheeky, elect a leader that's not from southern Vancouver Island like me. What I will be doing, because I've set my business aside, I will be able to travel the province to grow that MLA candidate slate in a broader fashion. In fact, in 2017, I believe we ran candidates in most of the ridings. So building on that, and I think if you remember in 2017, we were cited as having some really high caliber candidates from a broad range of backgrounds and professions. So building on that, I think we will be able to have a much greater impact going into the 2021 election.
Are there things in terms of the messaging that the BC Greens did in 2017 that would need to change to speak to people in Metro Van, in the interior, in the north, more to speak to them better, to build, to grow? Or do you think it's mostly just a matter of building on the success, keep attracting good candidates, and kind of hope it comes?
Well, I think our platform was BC. It was really BC centric. It wasn't necessarily Southern Vancouver Island centric, but being able to broadcast it more fully, I think it would be nice if we got a little bit more of the perhaps media attention in the Lower Mainland region. That will definitely help broadcast our policies and our platform. Although I think most people don't actually end up reading policies and platforms. Unfortunately, for us policy wonks, we like to do that. But I think if we can have the similar MLA candidates who ran in the last election continue their election campaigning for this election, I think we'll just be able to build on that.
So you mentioned a couple times throughout this interview that you've set aside your business and you're going to be working hard on recruiting candidates in the lead up to the next election. If there was a by-election that opened up between now and then, would you be seeking a seat?
If I win the leadership and a by-election does come up, or even if I didn't win the leadership and a by-election came up, because the election is so close around the corner, I've built my whole a relationship with my community, so I wouldn't seek a by-election seat in another jurisdiction outside of my own.
One of your biggest challenges in seeking the leadership is probably name recognition. How do you overcome that hurdle? I mean, Sonia Furstenau is in the legislature. She might not have the recognition that Adam or that Andrew Weaver has, but being an MLA does arguably put her at a fairly clear advantage. How do you get your name out there? How do you beat the juggernaut?
Yeah, good, very good question. She definitely has a much larger stage than what I have, and that especially with COVID-19 here, it has made that even more of an uphill battle without being able to have in-person events and whatnot. We are essentially running a digital campaign. We are running Zoom community forums every Thursday at 5. We'll be having expert panelists on those as well. So it is definitely it's not an easy challenge, but it is one that we're working on for sure.
So if you're successful and you become leader and you're in the next election, how do you see your ability to differentiate the Green Party under your leadership from the other two major parties you'll be competing against, the Liberals and the NDP?
Well, I really think that the BC Greens can do that through a few different issues that have come up since the 2017 election. Um, the investment into the fracking industry is one huge one that I think is going to fracture the NDP support from their environmental faction. So that is a really big one, as well as we now have a track record to show how much difference we have made in the BC legislature. Andrew Weaver has had the largest number of opposition party bills passed in the history of the BC legislature. His fingerprints have been all over the Clean BC paper, as well as the Climate Action Accountability Act that gives teeth to Clean BC. So we now have a track record. Oh, and I can't forget that we were responsible for banning corporate and union donations. So we now have a track record that we can say, look what has occurred as a result of just 3 Green MLAs. I mean, even the dialogue in the BC legislature, I still got a ways to go, but the respectful dialogue, the cooperating across party lines, we never would have thought that would have happened pre 2017.
If you were in Andrew Weaver's position after the 2017 election and you had the choice between working with John Horgan or Christy Clark, whose government would you have propped up?
Well, I wasn't involved in any of those conversations, and I'm not privy to what those conversations were. But if I had to, based on what I know, I would have to say I would not, I would have made the same choice.
It's easy in hindsight, I guess, or easier in hindsight.
And you know what? Thank you for saying that. I've been asked a few questions about what I would have done about a few different issues, and I think it's pretty arrogant having hindsight to then say, oh, you should have done this or you should have done that. It's really not fair. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
So before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And again, what I really want to do for the BC Green Party is to help them make the business case for the transition to a just economy. And if anybody wants to find out more about me, they can find out more at my website, which is kimdarwin.ca. Or on Facebook, just look up Kim Darwin, Leader for the BC Greens.
And how long do people have still to sign up and get involved in the race if they want to?
They have until September 1st.
Kim Darwin, thank you so much for taking the time this evening.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, let's move into a couple quick takes to round off this episode. So first up, the federal government has announced a new set of spending for provinces and territories to support them for a safe restart of the economy, as they're branding it. So this is a $19 billion package directed to provinces, with a little bit in there for cities as well. 4.2 billion for testing and tracing, 4.5 billion for PPE, 625 million for childcare spaces, a $2 billion fund for municipal operating costs, but this has to be matched by the provinces, as does the $1.8 billion in transit funding.
So lots of different bits and pools of money in there.
Yes, the other thing is there's a temporary national sick day program for 10 days of sick leave, estimated at 1.1 billion. It wouldn't surprise me if this ends up being temporary the way the income tax was temporary and sticks around a lot longer.
So getting to this point required a lot of negotiating between Chrystia Freeland and the premiers. The premiers had, or the federal government had originally offered $14 billion, and I guess the federal government dug up another $5 billion. There are a number of strings tied to this. For example, the matched funding for cities and transit that you mentioned. The sick leave policy will require provinces, John Horgan was saying in his press availability today, to amend their labor codes slightly. BC, he seemed to imply, has done some of the work, but it's still unclear exactly what this sick leave policy will look like. It's largely for those employers, like you said, who don't already provide it. It's a needed thing. It's a good thing. Why it's just temporary, I guess, is just to cap the price tag. But, sick leave is something that's kind of necessary all of the time. Like COVID is the acute bad scenario where not having sick leave can lead to outbreaks. But in a normal scenario, we don't need people coming to work contagious. It just harms other people. Don't do it.
Yeah, every year there's a flu season, and it's not good if people are spreading that around work. I think part of the reason it's temporary is because it would be a big, full program that, in theory, would be stepping on the province's toes. That labor regulations being an area of provincial jurisdiction, so this was probably something that could just get put in place quickly and wouldn't have the fights around it the way a permanent program would.
I mean, they got the provinces on board for this. Maybe some didn't want to stick on permanent, but they could just have any province can opt out, and those voters can decide whether they want a government that will work with Ottawa on a sick leave program, or like in Quebec, get the exact same thing with all the money but none of the strings. It's not exactly how it works, but it's how the Western provinces sometimes feel.
Yeah.
Overall, this is a pretty good step forward, I think, this package. Transit and cities had been looking for a lot of money. This is a start.
Yeah, so the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, I think it is, they estimate there's about a $14 to $15 billion shortfall. So when you add in the matching funds, this is still shy of $6 billion. So not nearly enough to cover it off, but it does start to at least stem the tide a bit.
The other news out of Ottawa this week has been just more and more and more about We Charity. There's a bevy of news stories from Canada Land, from mainstream media, from even Brian Lilly at the Toronto Sun, who I'd almost never linked to, got a scoop on the amount of real estate holdings that this charity has. And it's almost $44 million in 2018, which is sizable for a charity that predominantly does international aid.
Let's jump into that one first, because there's some weird stuff in there. So this is for their office in downtown Toronto, I don't know my Toronto geography well enough to place it exactly, but yeah, it's a sizable holding of Toronto real estate. But what's most interesting about it is the loose collection of we-related organizations, from the charity to the Me to We for-profit enterprise that's associated with this. Each of those hold a different holding that are nearby each other in the same area. So they've kind of assembled this real estate portfolio through a bunch of different organizations, including one that was purchased from the numbered company held by the Kielburgers' parents, which seems a little sketchy.
I'm not going to pretend to understand the intricacies of corporate governance structures at that scale or how you entangle real estate with it, but
Well, you work for a nonprofit, right? Like,
that owns zero property.
I know, but presumably some eyebrows would be raised if that nonprofit had purchased something from your parents, right? So like, it's weird.
Yeah. Well, in response to this and the ongoing controversies, We Organization has announced that they are canceling all planned We Day events, and they're doing a large restructuring to review some of these governance structures and aim to be more transparent. So we'll see in the mid to longer term how We comes out of this. I think this intense level of scrutiny that they're being put under has been merited in some ways. I particularly have appreciated the analysis looking at We from a, is this actually, is their ultimate aim, the feed the children type aim, the go save the African children, is that even a good, charitable, not even, it's charitable, but is it something positive for the world? Is this just a white savior type complex situation that makes Canadian children feel good, but how good is the impact? So charities definitely deserve scrutiny as well, especially as they get to the size where they can get billion-dollar government contracts. But I guess the other big half of the story is on the government side, where in Parliament there have been a round of hearings starting to look into this, and Bardish Chagger was before them today, starting to talk about some or answer some questions around this whole controversy. One of the headlines noted that she admitted that the contract with We that was initially $19.5 million for administering this student grant program could have escalated to over $43 million once various top-ups and funds that would have been funneled to other organizations was accounted for.
That seems like a sizable difference.
Yeah, it's more than double. Lots of little nuggets in there. Chrystia Freeland was also trotted out, and she kind of tried to spread the blame around, saying everyone in cabinet was responsible for this controversy, but she maintains that she still has her complete confidence in the Prime Minister, which is reassuring that the Deputy Prime Minister is not in open revolt. This isn't the Martin Chrétien era, at least publicly.
Yeah, but it's one of those things, if you have to say it, it's not a good sign. And yeah, she's right that everyone at the cabinet table does deserve some of the blame, because someone should have said this was a terrible idea that will only hurt the government. And either no one did or they were ignored, and either way, that's not a good sign. But still, there's Trudeau and Morneau not recusing themselves from this. That's on them. That's not on cabinet as a whole.
So does this whole controversy on the government side, does it hang more on Trudeau as an individual leader or on the Liberal Party of Canada? Like, as it boils on, would a change in leadership, like if Freeland stepped in, because so far she hasn't really been implicated other than in her statement today where she said, well, everyone who was there is responsible. Could she right this ship, or does this smell of everyone or enough people in the Liberal Party are rotten that the whole thing is in danger?
So I don't think the ship is sinking so much, but it's definitely taking on some water. And if they were to replace the Prime Minister, it might just end up hurting them more, because it would signal what a big deal this is. Like, it's bad, but I'm not sure it really raises to the you fire the First Minister level of bad.
And I guess there's not really a strong opposition in place. The Conservatives are still trying to decide who will be their next leader. The NDP has at least some credibility on this file, or at least not the dirt that the Liberals are sitting with. But aside from kind of just saying the same things as the Conservatives, either slightly before or slightly after, in terms of what investigations should happen. Although I don't think the NDP called for the cops to investigate this. And that was a weird one. I don't actually know what crime has been committed.
That was probably something around corrupt dealings of government officials somewhere in the criminal code. I know we're not lawyers. And I haven't reviewed in detail, but there's probably, if there was something improper about this, it's not out of the realm possibility that there may have been something criminal about it. But regardless, I think it's the most appropriate place right now for this to be investigated is the parliamentary committees and the ethics commissioner. And depending on what they come back with, it will either be survivable for Trudeau or not.
Yeah.
If it's just everything looks really bad, which is what we seem to know now, that's probably survivable. If it's something where there was more of a quid pro quo that gets uncovered, then yeah, maybe the end of Trudeau's premiership. But still, I think that's the less likely outcome of the two.
In any case, we're talking about this scandal far longer than I expected to. But I guess that happened with SNC as well.
Yeah, is this going to be a multi-month thing or just a short time?
Summers are quiet. We might be talking about this until September, unless COVID explodes again in Canada. But I'd rather talk about charity corruption scandals than pandemics.
Yeah, and even if COVID explodes again, I'm not sure you're going to get the same crisis rally around the flag. Politics is suspended as much as it can be situation that happened when it first hit. You may move back into that stage a bit, but it's not going to be the way it was in late March. But speaking of things we've been talking about for a while now, Huawei's back in the news. This time, one of our Five Eyes partners, the UK, has reversed course and decided to ban Huawei from its 5G network starting at the end of the year and requires all the equipment to be stripped out of the system by 2027. And this is a reversal, of course, from the decision they made early in the year, I think it was, late last year, where they decided they were going to allow it in some parts but not others.
Yeah, a previous report had estimated that a full ban on Huawei would cost an additional £2 billion to wireless providers there and delay the rollout of 5G by 2 to 3 years. Now, the Conservative ministers announcing this this week said, well, it'll only delay it by a year. They're also not pulling Huawei tech out of 2, 3, or 4G networks, so it's just the 5G going forward, which does raise the question of, if your problem is with the company and the country behind the company, then wouldn't you care about all of it? Or is this political posturing based on the US's pressure around how Trump does not want any country really using Huawei at this point?
I think it's going to depend a bit on how integrated it is in the other levels of the network. But the main reason I want to talk about this is that after this decision by Britain, that basically leaves Canada as the only country that's not made a decision on Huawei. So within the Five Eyes, so New Zealand hasn't officially banned it, but all their providers have gone with alternate suppliers.
Well, and that's pretty much what we've resulted in at this point now, as far as I know. Or are we still waiting on one or two?
I think most of the major ones have gone that way, but there's still no real government decision on that, which there probably will be at some point. But yeah, I think this is just going to put further pressure on the Trudeau government to make a decision on that, which they've been delaying for months. So the other somewhat related news story that was uncovered and posted today by John Iveson at the National Post was that our embassy security systems have a contract awarded to a Chinese state-owned firm for security equipment at the various embassies.
Specifically, this is to buy conveyor-style X-ray machines from a company called Nuctech.
They're apparently a major supplier in the field.
Yeah, they do a lot of airport security, I guess. from the reporting, it says these machines won't be connected into the broader IT infrastructure of embassies. And so it was largely just a matter of, who can present the lowest bid on a machine that can do what needs to be done.
Well, I don't think it was actually
It wasn't confirmed by the government, but that's sort of what's alleged by the info on the government procurement website.
Yeah, so government contracts can be evaluated on a bunch of different metrics. Sometimes lowest price is it, sometimes there's other factors. So at the time this story came out, the government hadn't responded and clarified what the criteria were. But regardless, it's probably, even if it isn't hardwired into the IT networks, it's probably good if we don't source critical security infrastructure from countries that are, at the very least, antagonistic towards Canada.
But an X-ray machine isn't critical. Like, it's necessary, but what are they going to do? Like what is the actual risk here? That China disables the X-ray machines and then invades our embassies? Like, I feel like this is a paranoid story. Like, I get some of the other things. I get Huawei and the 5G question because everyone uses a cell phone, including government ministers, but who cares? Why is this a story? Like, they're X-ray machines. They just sit there inertly.
Well, it is also for a contract for installation, a bunch of other related stuff. So it would be given access to the embassies.
It's a stretch. This is like Soviet era Red Scare stuff. It's like, I don't buy that this is a story, other than for the conservative base that's really eager to whip up anti-China rhetoric. And I think there are much better ways to criticize China than to worry about X-ray machines and a contract that saved us money.
Well, I think it does relate to kind of the larger conversation that's been happening over the past year around supply chain dependencies. And Canada is just too small a country to source everything domestically, but it's probably a good idea strategically to be looking at least when it comes to stuff such as security, defense-related equipment, and what critical infrastructure, to be sourcing those from at least within our network of allies. Anyway, I mainly want to deflate it because I think it's going to probably be the sort of thing that's going to be discussed over the next week and relates to the larger conversation that has been happening in Canada and it's going to continue around our relationship with China.
My favorite bit in this story is the quote from Guy St. Jacques, a former Canadian ambassador to Beijing, who was talking about the difficulties of American or Canadian companies competing with Chinese ones because there's allegations that the Chinese government essentially subsidizes its companies to compete on the global stage and lets them undercut anyone else. And he says, the problem of competing with state-owned companies is very difficult, which just kind of just makes me say, well, then why don't we have our own state-owned companies? Like, if the market can't work, then let's just not use it. But, different challenges. A couple of years ago when we started this podcast, I don't think you would have predicted that you'd be defending the need for domestic supply chains in 2020.
Well, allied supply chains. I think, yeah. I think if we were to go back and listen to those, there's a few where I think I was point out that maybe we shouldn't do as much domestic military procurement, but within our allies, but definitely, I think critical infrastructure and securities is one of those items that is a clear exception to the more globalized free trade is always better.
Well, let's pivot from domestic versus international supply chains to the provincial and domestic budget numbers and how much money we have and don't have. Carol James announced a fiscal update this weekend, a bit of a snapshot of the picture of where the province is at, which follows the formal federal fiscal snapshot. BC this year is now looking at a $12.5 billion deficit as a reversal from the $227 million surplus they were looking at. This is split roughly evenly between a $6.3 billion hit to revenues and a similar amount of increased spending for additional healthcare and the various support and aid packages that have been rolled out.
So I was actually a little surprised that it wasn't higher. I know some people have had sticker shock at this, but honestly, $12.5 billion, considering just how badly the economy's been hammered and how much additional spending's gone out the door, that actually seems maybe a little lower than I would have guessed if you just asked me before these numbers came out.
Yeah, I thought the same. They also predict that the GDP is going to drop 6.8% this year. Overall, provincial unemployment is at 13%, and it's up to 29% for youth, which goes back to what Kim Darwin was talking about in her interview.
So yeah, I'm sure the Liberals will make a little bit of hay out of this, but nobody's really questioned the need for any of the spending or any of the, or question why the revenues have fallen. So politically, it's not going to, I think, have a huge impact.
Yeah, even the vice president of the BC Business Council was out there pretty much defending that, this is entirely due to COVID-19. Economists were also agreeing there's no one who's really got a credible leg to stand on to criticize these numbers. I mean, the BC Liberals, like you say, will call them out, but what could they have done differently? Like, we would be in a worse position if we hadn't done what we had. And I think there's still a lot more to do, and I'll be looking forward to the decisions by the province about what they're going to do with that. What is it, $1.5 billion that was to start a restart plan that they had announced quite a while back.
And for the last week or two, the main Liberal attack line's been the province hasn't provided a clear plan for small businesses, a few other things for the recovery. So it would be quite a pivot. That's hard to do, to go into full-on attack on the deficit when I don't think it's a particularly salient issue for a lot of British Columbians. So, I'm sure there will be a fundraising email that goes out about it, but that's probably going to be about as much as they push beyond maybe a couple questions here in question period.
And also remember that money is free right now. Interest rates are so absurdly low. And I think the Bank of Canada's governor announced or had hinted that they're going to stay low for quite a while. So
yeah, it's pretty close to money printed O'Burr territory.
Yeah, who cares? No, who does not matter. Spend, baby, spend.
And finally, on a bit of a side note for our last story, BC has recorded a record high monthly total of deaths from illicit drugs during June. This beat the previously set record, I think, in May of this year. Yeah, it's just one of those tragedies that have been unfolded parallel to the COVID-19 situation, and some of the responses to that have had spillover effects.
Yeah, part of what the chief coroner and others are saying in the government announcement is just that the pandemic really compounded the pre-existing overdose crisis. You have people, it was even starting to turn around, arguably, by many of the metrics that the interventions and the harm reduction efforts have been working. But as soon as you have to start making people so physically distant, stay home more, they use in more dangerous situations, they don't get the help they need. And then you also close the border, so the drug supply shrinks and it gets more unmanageable. Even everything just got worse. There have been some steps by the province that possibly abetted this from being even worse in terms of almost piloting safe supply. But Lisa Lapointe, the chief coroner, Dr. Perry Kendall from the BC Centre for Substance Use, and others across the province are quoted in this of really highlighting the importance of making sure access to safe supply is out there. Dr. Kendall is talking about decriminalizing personal possession so that there's no threat on the people who are using drugs. And even John Horgan recently has started echoing support for decriminalization, emphasizing from his point of view that it's on the federal government's agenda to take on, while still not quite uptaking the recommendations from several years ago of Dr. Bonnie Henry on what the province can do to those steps. a lot more needs to be done. And, we're getting daily updates still on COVID with 1 or 2 or 0 deaths, but 175 deaths is, 4 or 5 a day or more, doing math quickly in my head. Maybe we need to be just having that press conference as well. I know that's almost cliche to say, but, this is the ongoing crisis that we can't forget about.
And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our Slack channel at patreon.com/Politicoast. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikoff. Politicoast is a production of Legend Boot Media, and editing services are provided by CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Wash your hands and stay home. Thanks for listening.